The night was alive with energy. Music pulsed through the house, the bass vibrating through my chest. Laughter and voices filled every corner, and the air was thick with the scent of summer and excitement. I leaned against the balcony railing, my eyes scanning the glittering Los Angeles skyline. The city sparkled, oblivious to the chaos of a teenage party happening a dozen stories above. I took a sip of soda, letting the cold bubbles snap against my lips. My mind wandered, restless and conflicted. College was only a year away, and all anyone ever wanted to talk about was my future. My mom's brother, who had been staying with us for the past few months, was the only one who didn't ask me a million questions. Maybe that's why I liked talking to him so much. He listened. He understood. And now he was here. I sensed him before I saw him. "Hey," he said softly. His voice was steady and warm, a stark contrast to the chaos behind us. "Hey," I replied without turning. The city held my gaze, the millions of tiny lights stretching to infinity. It felt safer to look at them than to look at him. "You all right?" he asked, moving closer. His elbow brushed against mine, and that small contact sent a ripple through me. I tensed, surprised at my reaction. I wasn't sure why my heart was pounding. "I guess," I murmured. "I just feel like everyone's expecting me to have it all figured out. And I don't." He didn't say anything right away. He leaned on the railing, mirroring my stance. The cool night air tangled in his hair. We stayed like that for a moment, the silence stretching, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a pause in a conversation we'd been having for years. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said finally. "You're allowed to take your time." His words made something in my chest tighten. I looked at him, then really looked at him. The city lights painted his features in soft gold and deep shadow. His eyes were serious, searching mine. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name, a mix of concern, affection, and something else. Something dangerous. I swallowed hard. The air between us was changing, charged with something unspoken. My brain screamed at me to back away, to say something light, to break whatever was building. But my feet were rooted to the spot. His hand lifted, almost hesitantly, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch was gentle, and his fingertips lingered just a moment too long. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "I shouldn't," I started to say, but the words tangled on my tongue. "I know," he said quietly. And then it happened. He leaned in just enough for our lips to brush. It was a whisper of a kiss, quick and soft, like a match being struck. My eyes widened in shock, and he pulled back immediately. The moment shattered like glass. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. Panic surged through me, hot and fierce. My mind screamed at me, a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and something even scarier. A flash of desire. I have to go," I choked out. I turned and bolted through the balcony door, shoving my way into the throng of partygoers. Music blasted, the beat hammering in my ears. I felt like I was underwater, drowning in noise and heat. My vision blurred, and I barely registered the people around me. I had to get out. I made it to the living room, my eyes darting wildly for an exit. But then I saw him. A guy I didn't recognize, standing near the kitchen. He was tall, with dark hair and a sharp smile. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second I thought he was just another random guest. Then I noticed the way he was looking at me. Not with curiosity, but with something sharper, more focused. Like he knew something he shouldn't. My heart dropped into my stomach. Had he seen? Before I could think, he smirked and lifted his phone. He tapped the screen and slid it into his pocket, all without breaking eye contact. A chill slid down my spine. I turned away, my hands trembling. My mind was a mess of panic and fear. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave before everything spiraled out of control. I pushed through the crowd, not caring who I bumped into. The laughter, the music, the lights. Everything was too much. I burst through the front door and into the night air, gulping in breaths like I'd been suffocating. The street was quiet compared to the chaos inside. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the building, my fingers gripping the rough surface. What had just happened? What had I done? The memory of that kiss, fleeting and forbidden, burned behind my eyes. And now someone new. Someone who could ruin everything. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to steady my breathing. But deep down I knew things would never be the same again. I spent the entire night staring at my ceiling. My room, usually a place of comfort, felt like a prison. The memory of that kiss pulsed through me. the warmth, the confusion, the sheer wrongness of it all. And then there was that guy. His knowing eyes, the smug smile, the way he slid his phone into his pocket. My thoughts spiraled in an endless loop of fear and regret. When morning came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, harsh and judgmental. I dragged myself out of bed, my limbs heavy, and got ready for school in a fog. My reflection in the mirror showed dark circles under my eyes, a hollow look I barely recognized. The drive to school felt like a slow march to the gallows. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Every time I stopped at a light, I half expected that guy to appear in the car next to me, smirking, holding up his phone as if to say, "I've got you." But the street stayed empty, the world going on as if nothing had changed. As I walked through the school entrance, the hallways seemed louder than usual. Every laugh sounded sharper, every glance felt loaded with meaning. My stomach twisted with paranoia. Did they know? No, it wasn't possible. But the fear gnawed at me all the same. At my locker, my best friend Emma appeared out of nowhere. Her bright smile and bouncing ponytail were a painful reminder of normalcy. She leaned against the locker next to mine, chattering away about her weekend, oblivious to the storm inside me. "You okay?" she asked suddenly, her smile faltering. "You seem off." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well." Emma's eyes narrowed. She knew me too well, but thankfully she didn't press. "You need coffee, Stat," she declared, linking her arm through mine. "Let's hit the cafeteria before the bell." I let her drag me along, trying to focus on her words, on the routine, on anything but the dread curling in my stomach. The cafeteria was buzzing with early morning energy. Students gossiping, finishing homework, scrolling through their phones. I froze. The phones. What if... "Hey, I forgot my notebook," I blurted. "I'll meet you in class, okay?" Emma gave me a questioning look but shrugged. "Sure. Don't be late." I spun around and hurried out, my heart hammering. I needed to talk to him, to my uncle. We had to figure out what to do. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. Maybe the guy didn't actually have anything. Or maybe I was already too late. The bell rang as I slipped into an empty hallway. I pulled out my phone and texted my uncle. "We need to talk. Urgent." I stared at the screen, willing a reply to come through. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. My stomach twisted tighter. Finally, his reply popped up. "Meet me at the park after school. We'll figure it out." Relief and anxiety tangled together. I shoved my phone into my pocket and rushed to class, but the minutes crawled by. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that my life was one misstep away from falling apart. After school, I drove to the park, my fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. The parking lot was half empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. I spotted him leaning against a bench, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I got out of the car, my legs shaky. The sound of my sneakers on the pavement felt too loud. "Hey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his eyes softening when he saw me. "Hey." I sat down on the bench beside him. The silence stretched, filled with things neither of us wanted to say. Finally he spoke. "Tell me everything." I did. The kiss. The guy. The phone. The way he looked at me like he held a secret that could destroy us. My uncle's jaw clenched. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "We'll get through this," he said, but there was a tightness in his voice that scared me. "Will we?" I whispered. "What if he shows someone the photo?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out at the park, at the kids playing on the swings, their laughter carried on the wind. "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll handle it. Together." I nodded, the weight in my chest easing just a little. His hand brushed mine, a brief, comforting touch. For a moment, it felt like we were just two people trying to find our way through a mess we hadn't meant to create. He stood up. "We should go. People might." Before he could finish, a movement caught my eye. Across the park, half hidden behind a tree, was him. The guy from the party. His phone was in his hand, aimed in our direction. My blood ran cold. Our eyes met and he smirked. He gave a small wave, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the street beyond the park. My uncle's face went pale. "We need to leave. Now." We hurried to the car, fear tightening around me like a vice. As I slid into the passenger seat, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. I couldn't stop shaking. My fingers trembled as I adjusted my seatbelt, my uncle starting the car in silence. The engine's low rumble was the only sound as we pulled away from the park. The sky was beginning to dim, the sun dipping below the city skyline, and I felt like everything around me was sinking into darkness. He didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The weight of the silence pressed down on me, every second ticking by like a countdown to something worse. I stared out the window, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The trees blurred past, the streets becoming a smudge of headlights and shadows. When we finally pulled into the driveway of my house, I felt like I was going to explode. I pushed the car door open, stumbling out, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My uncle came around the car, his hand on my shoulder, steady but hesitant. "Let's go inside," he said quietly. I nodded, though the thought of being inside didn't bring any comfort. The walls of our house, once a place of safety, now felt like they were closing in. We walked through the door and I barely heard it click shut behind me. The air inside was stale, heavy with unspoken words and dread. He turned to me, his eyes shadowed. "We need to talk about what's happening," he said, his voice low. "We can't keep pretending it'll go away." I swallowed, my throat dry. "What can we do?" My voice cracked. "He has a photo. He could show it to anyone. Everyone." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the living room. "Maybe we're overthinking this. Maybe he's just messing with you, trying to scare you." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No. You didn't see the way he looked at me. He knows. He's enjoying this." He stopped pacing, his gaze locking with mine. The fear I saw there mirrored my own. He wanted to fix this, to protect me, but we were both trapped in the same web, the same mistake we couldn't undo. "All right," he said finally. "We need to stay calm. Let's think it through. Maybe we talk to him, ask him what he wants." The thought made my stomach twist. What if that makes it worse? "It might," he admitted. "But we can't just wait for him to decide when to ruin everything." A sudden knock on the door made us both freeze. My heart stopped. I looked at him, panic rising in my chest. His eyes widened, and for a moment neither of us moved. The knock came again, harder this time. I took a shaky breath and stepped toward the door. My fingers felt numb as I reached for the handle. I opened it just a crack, my breath catching. It wasn't him. It was Emma. Relief crashed over me like a wave, but it was short-lived. Her eyes were wide, her brow furrowed. "Hey," she said, her voice uncertain. "Can I come in?" I glanced back at my uncle. He nodded slightly, stepping away from the living room and disappearing into the hallway. I opened the door wider, letting Emma in. She stepped inside, her gaze flicking around like she was trying to figure out what was wrong. He turned to me. "Are you okay? You ran out of school so fast and you haven't answered my texts." "I'm fine," I said automatically, but my voice wobbled. I hugged my arms to my chest, trying to keep it together. She wasn't buying it. Her eyes softened. "You're not fine. What's going on? You know you can tell me anything, right?" The urge to tell her everything, to unload the fear and guilt, was overwhelming. But the words caught in my throat. How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? How could I tell her about the photo, the guy, the mistake that was slowly pulling my life apart? "I can't," I whispered. I can't." Her face fell. "Okay," she said softly. "But whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here. Always." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Emma wrapped her arms around me, and for a second, I let myself lean into her, trying to absorb the comfort she offered. But it was short-lived. A buzzing noise snapped me back to reality. My phone. I pulled away, dread clawing up my spine. I fumbled in my pocket, my hands shaking as I looked at the screen. A text message. From an unknown number. "Nice chat in the park. Too bad it's not going to stay secret much longer." My vision blurred. The phone slipped from my fingers, landing with a dull thud on the carpet. Emma looked down at it, then back at me, confusion and worry etched into her face. "What is it?" she asked. "Who's that from?" I couldn't answer. My legs felt like jelly and I sank onto the couch. My whole world was spinning, the walls closing in tighter and tighter. Emma picked up my phone, her eyes scanning the message. She went pale. "What is going on, seriously?" I couldn't look at her. "It's nothing. Just, forget it." She stared at me, hurt flickering in her eyes. "You're shutting me out." Her voice trembled. "I want to help you. I shook my head. You can't. The door to the hallway creaked. My uncle stepped back into the room, his expression grim. He took one look at Emma, then at me, and something in his eyes hardened. We need to figure this out now, he said quietly. Emma's eyes darted between us, realization dawning. This is bigger than you're letting on, isn't it? But before I could answer, another text came through. Tick-tock. Time's running out. The room felt like it was collapsing around me. I couldn't breathe. The text on my screen blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. The weight of everything, the kiss, the photo, the threats, was crushing me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might shatter. Emma was still staring at me, her eyes wide with confusion and concern. I wanted to explain, to say something that would make this all go away, but there were no words that could fix this. My uncle broke the silence first. His voice was low, steady, but I could hear the fear beneath it. We need to go, he said. We can't stay here. Emma looked between us, her brow furrowed. Go where? What's going on? You're scaring me. I couldn't meet her eyes. My voice came out as a whisper. I'm sorry, I can't explain right now. Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. No. You're not running away from me. If something's wrong, I want to help. I pulled my wrist away, my stomach twisting. You can't help. Please just trust me. She took a step back, her face clouding with hurt. Fine. If that's how it is. I watched her leave, each step she took feeling like a knife in my chest. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, but it sounded like the end of everything. I wanted to chase after her, to pull her back and tell her everything, but there wasn't time. We have to go now, my uncle said, his voice urgent. Grab what you need. I nodded numbly, my mind a blur. I raced to my room, grabbing my backpack and shoving in random clothes, my charger and a few toiletries. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my water bottle twice before managing to zip the bag shut. The walls of my room, the posters, the photos, everything seemed to close in on me. I was leaving my life behind and there was nothing I could do to stop it. When I came back downstairs, my uncle was waiting by the door. He had his own bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes dark with worry. Ready? I swallowed hard. Yeah. We slipped out into the fading light, the air thick with impending nightfall. My uncle's car was parked at the curb, the engine still warm from our earlier drive. I slid into the passenger seat, my fingers clutching the straps of my backpack like a lifeline. As we pulled away from the house, I turned to look back one last time. The windows glowed softly, the porch light casting a warm halo on the front steps. It was a picture of normalcy, a snapshot of a life that no longer felt like mine. My chest ached. We drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. The city blurred past us, glowing billboards, bustling sidewalks, the distant glimmer of headlights. I wondered if anyone noticed us, two people caught in a spiral of fear and regret. After what felt like an eternity, my uncle broke the silence. We need to figure out our next move. I stared straight ahead. Where are we even going? Away from here, he said. Just for a couple of days. Until we can think clearly. The plan was flimsy, but I didn't have the energy to question it. My mind was a fog of exhaustion and fear. I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my burning forehead. Street lights flickered past, each one like a tiny pulse of light in the dark. Hours seemed to slip away. We passed through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, the familiar city streets giving way to quieter roads. The car's interior felt suffocating, the silence between us growing heavier with each mile. Eventually, we stopped at a small gas station on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the cracked pavement. My uncle turned off the engine and sighed. I'll get some gas, he said. Stay here. I nodded, my fingers picking at a loose thread on my jeans. As he stepped out, the door closed with a soft thud. The air inside the car was still too still. I looked out the window, my eyes scanning the empty lot. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows pooling in every corner. Then I saw him. The guy from the party. He was standing near the edge of the lot, half hidden in the shadows. My heart stopped. He was leaning casually against a post, his phone in his hand, that same smirk on his face. My breath caught in my throat. How did he find us? Panic surged through me. My uncle was still at the pump, oblivious to what was happening. I fumbled with the door handle, my hands slick with sweat. It wouldn't budge, the lock was stuck. My heart pounded against my ribs, terror clawing at my chest. The guy lifted his phone and I saw the screen light up. A message popped up on my own phone seconds later. "You can run but you can't hide." I gasped, the words like ice in my veins. The air in the car felt too thin, my vision tunneling. My fingers flew to my phone, but my uncle was already coming back, a worried look on his face. He opened the door, his eyes darting between me and the lot. "What's wrong?" I pointed, my voice shaking. "He's here." But when we both looked, the guy was gone. The lot was empty, the shadows still and silent. I turned to my uncle, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to keep moving." He nodded, starting the car again, his jaw tight. As we pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We were running, but there was nowhere left to hide. The headlights cut through the darkness, the road stretching out in front of us like an endless ribbon. The tension in the car was suffocating. My uncle's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap in two. I sat rigid, my fingers wrapped around the straps of my backpack, knuckles white. We'd been driving for hours, but the fear hadn't faded. If anything, it had burrowed deeper, gnawing at me with each passing mile. My phone lay dark and silent in my lap, but I knew it was just a matter of time before the next message came through. There was no escaping this, no outrunning what we'd done. "Where are we even going?" I finally asked, my voice sounding small and hollow. My uncle's jaw clenched. "Somewhere safe," he said, though I could hear the doubt in his words. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The landscape outside had changed. The city lights were long gone, replaced by stretches of dark, empty fields. I couldn't help but feel like we were drifting further away from everything I knew, everything I was supposed to be. I wanted to scream, to stop the car, to turn back time and undo everything. But there was no going back. A sign loomed ahead, its letters blurred by the night. "Maple Creek, 10 miles. "Why there?" I asked. "It's quiet," he replied. "No one will know us." I nodded numbly, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The idea of being somewhere no one knew us should have felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt like erasure, like disappearing piece by piece. Minutes later, we pulled into the tiny town. The streets were deserted, the storefronts dark and shuttered. A lone street lamp flickered, casting pools of yellow light on the cracked pavement. My uncle drove slowly, his eyes scanning the road. Finally, he pulled into a small motel lot. The neon sign buzzed weakly, "Vacancy." He killed the engine and we sat in silence for a moment. The ticking of the cooling engine was the only sound. My uncle exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. "We'll stay here for the night," he said. "We need rest." I nodded, though the thought of sleeping seemed impossible. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. My uncle grabbed our bags and we walked toward the office. The bell above the door jingled as we entered. The clerk barely looked up, sliding a key across the counter with a bored expression. "Room 12. We made our way down the narrow walkway, the faded numbers barely visible in the dim light. The door creaked as my uncle unlocked it. The room was small, with a single bed, a worn-out chair, and a window covered by heavy drapes. The air smelled faintly of mildew. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank onto the edge of the bed. My legs felt like they could barely hold me up anymore. My uncle set his bag down and rubbed his face with both hands. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice low. But he didn't sound convinced. I lay back on the bed, staring at the stained ceiling. The events of the past few days played in a loop behind my eyes. The kiss, the texts, the guy who wouldn't leave us alone. The weight of it all pressed down on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. A knock on the door shattered the silence. I bolted upright, my heart leaping into my throat. My uncle's eyes met mine, wide and fearful. He moved to the door, hesitated, then peered through the peephole. He exhaled. "It's Emma." "What?" I whispered, my stomach twisting. He unlocked the door and Emma walked in, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and anger. She looked at me, then at my uncle. "I followed you," she said simply. "I knew something was wrong and I couldn't let you just disappear." Tears welled in my eyes. "Emma, you shouldn't be here." "I don't care," she snapped. "You're my best friend. Whatever this is, I want to help." I looked away, shame burning in my chest. "You can't help them. It's too late." "No, it's not," she insisted, her voice shaking. "You're running from something and it's only making things worse." My uncle's face was tight with worry. "You need to go back home," he said gently. "This isn't your fight." Emma crossed her arms. "I'm not leaving without you." Suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound sliced through the air like a knife. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. A new message glowed on the screen. "Time's up. Everyone's going to know." I gasped, my vision swimming. My uncle read the message over my shoulder, his face going pale. Emma's eyes darted between us, confusion etched on her features. "What does it mean?" she asked. "What's going to happen?" I couldn't answer. A sob rose in my throat, the walls of the tiny room closing in on me. My uncle's hand rested on my shoulder, his fingers trembling. "We can't run anymore," he said softly. The realization settled over me like a stone. We were out of options. Out of time. The truth was going to come out, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Emma knelt in front of me, her eyes filled with tears. "Whatever happens, I'm here. You don't have to face it alone." But as I looked at her, at my uncle, I realized the damage was already done. The bonds between us were stretched too thin, fraying under the weight of secrets and mistakes. And I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again.